The map said there was room. Room for a lake, room for a salt mine, room for a test well. On November 20th, 1980, at Jefferson Island, Louisiana, that map became the last barrier between three different worlds. Above it was Lake Peigneur, a shallow body of water that had been used for fishing and recreation. Beneath it was the Jefferson Island Salt Mine, a room and pillar operation cut into a salt dome. Between them, on the surface of the lake, a drilling rig was looking for oil. By noon, the lake was no longer behaving like a lake, it was draining. The water moved in a circle. Barges began moving with it. Trees and land followed. A canal that normally carried water away from Lake Peigneur reversed direction and started feeding water back toward the hole. Air trapped in the mine came back up through shafts with enough force to damage mine structures on the surface. No human being died. That fact is part of what makes the story easy to misunderstand. Because if a disaster leaves no bodies, it can start to look like a strange accident, a regional legend, a piece of footage from a world that briefly stopped obeying physics. But the official record is more useful than that. Lake Peigneur was a coordination failure expressed as geology. It shows a place where two industries were allowed to work in the same salt dome, from opposite directions, trusting drawings and coordinates to keep them apart. The question is not only how a lake disappeared. The question is why the only thing separating an oil well from a mine was a shared belief that everyone knew where everything was. Lake Peigneur sat near the northern end of the Five Islands Salt Dome Trend in South Louisiana. These are not islands in the oceanic sense. They are low rises in flat coastal country, lifted by salt moving upward from deep below. Around Gulf Coast salt domes, bent rock layers can trap oil and gas. The salt itself can be mined. The same buried structure can attract drilling, mining, storage, and scientific work. That is the first warning in the geography. The place was useful to too many people for too many reasons. Jefferson Island was not empty land. It had a salt mine. It had gardens. It had homes and workers and access roads. It had Lake Peigneur, shallow enough in many accounts to be described in single-digit or low double-digit feet before the accident. The MSHA report gives a pre-inundation range of roughly 4 to 15 feet. Under part of that lake were the mine workings of Diamond Crystal Salt Company. The mine used a room and pillar method. That means salt was removed in rooms, while pillars of salt were left behind to hold the roof. On a diagram, it can look orderly. Cavities, walls, supports, levels, shafts. But underground maps are not the same as underground certainty. The mine had a long history. It employed hundreds of people at the site. It operated around the clock. It had emergency procedures. It had people who knew that water in a salt mine was not just water. Water is a mining hazard. In a salt mine, it is also a cutting tool. Fresh water does not simply pass through salt. It dissolves it. If water finds a path into a salt opening, the path can grow. A narrow entry can become a larger entry. A small failure can start changing its own geometry. That is why the official MSHA investigation did not treat the event as a mystery of spectacle. It treated it as an inundation. An inundation is a mine being flooded. The lake disappearing was the surface expression. The mine flooding was the disaster. On the morning of November 20th, there were two Texaco drilling operations in the area, one on the lakeshore and one on the lake. Their work was proceeding while mining continued below. The lake rig had been drilling a test well. Records examined by investigators show the drill assembly reached roughly 1,248 feet when the bit became stuck and drilling mud circulation was lost. On a rig, lost circulation means the drilling fluid is not returning the way it should. It is going somewhere. In ordinary drilling, that can mean a porous formation, a fracture, or another underground opening. Here, the meaning would become much larger. The crew tried to free the stuck pipe. Hook loads rose, the rig began to list. Popping sounds were reported below the rig. By early morning, the rig was tilting enough that the crew abandoned it. That decision saved lives. At about 7:25 in the morning, the rig overturned. Later, the drilling platform and equipment disappeared. Underground, shortly after the day shift entered the mine, water was detected. The miners evacuated. This is one of the few parts of the story where the record is almost clean in its outcome. MSHA states that emergency evacuation was carried out immediately, and because the procedures were followed, there were no injuries or loss of life. For the miners, the warning was not an abstract risk. A normal shift had barely begun. Then water was where it should not be, and the evacuation plan became the only useful map. The map did not save the mine. The evacuation procedure saved the miners. The human anchor here is not a single dramatic last moment. It is a set of documented actions by workers who recognized an inrush, followed the procedure, and got out before the mine became a flooded void. On the lake, the human scale becomes visible through Leonce Vietter Jr. and his nephew Timothy Dorr, who were fishing when the water began to leave beneath them. Contemporary reporting places them on the lake as the whirlpool took shape. They escaped to shore. What they saw was not a technical failure at first. It was a familiar lake beginning to move the wrong way. Their presence matters because it shows how close this came to being a very different story. A shallow lake does not announce that it is about to become a drain. A fisherman does not look at a familiar body of water and expect the bottom to open into industrial space. That is the central contradiction of Lake Peigneur. The hazard was not hidden in an unknown wilderness. It was built into a known place, documented in separate systems, each system confident in its own map. By the time MSHA officials arrived, the surface had become a moving diagram of everything connected below. A whirlpool and a smaller eddy were visible. Over the next 2 hours, a vast whirlpool developed. The official report says it carried a tugboat, barges, and 2 oil rigs down into the crater. The word crater is important. This was no longer only a drill hole. The opening had enlarged as water entered the salt mine. Ground moved. The lake bed collapsed into the underground spaces. Water pulled sediment and objects with it. At the mine shafts, the displaced air had to go somewhere. Water entering the mine compressed the air already inside. It exhausted violently through the air shaft and the main shaft. At one shaft, mud and water sprayed the area. At another, the outpouring air damaged the head frame enclosure. The mine was becoming a lung. Water went in, air came out, land slid toward the new void. About 65 acres of land, including part of Live Oak Gardens, slumped below the normal lake level. The home of D.L. Jack Bayless was partially submerged when the earth moved and the lake refilled. Greenhouses were demolished. A natural gas fire burned on the water after a Texaco well damaged by the landslide released gas. The disaster had started underground, but it did not stay there. From here, the stronger reading becomes unavoidable. This was not only a drilling accident. It was the moment when 2 independent industrial systems, each with its own maps, each with its own logic, were forced to share a consequence neither had been designed to prevent. The official investigation considered the mine. It considered subsidence, mine maps, rock mechanics, closure rates, stress conditions, fracture zones, previous water problems, and possible outbursts. It considered the drilling operation, the location of the rig, the possibility that the well penetrated the mine, the possibility that it came close to mine openings, the loss of drilling mud, the stuck drill string, high hydrostatic pressures, and the actions of the drill crew. And one item sits in that list like a small hinge: coordination between Texaco and Diamond Crystal. I am willing to argue that this is the most important phrase in the report because it moves the story away from a single dramatic hole and toward the problem that allowed the hole to matter. 2 companies had different reasons to trust the same underground space. One removed salt from it, one drilled near it. Both depended on knowing where the other one's danger began. The public version of Lake Peigneur often turns on a clean explanation. The drill bit pierced the mine, water rushed in, the lake drained. That is broadly consistent with the likely mechanism, but the official record is more careful about blame and exact cause than many retellings are. MSHA's job was to determine, if possible, the causes of the inundation and prevent similar accidents. The report documents a strong chain of events, but the physical evidence that could have settled every question was damaged, submerged, or destroyed by the event itself. So the honest reconstruction must separate what is proven from what is likely. It is proven that Lake Peigneur was above part of the mine workings. It is proven that Texaco drilling was underway while mining continued below. It is proven that the drilling operations suffered lost circulation and a stuck bit before the rig tilted and was abandoned. It is proven that water entered the mine and the lake drained into the resulting collapse. It is proven that no human injuries or deaths occurred because evacuation was immediate. It is likely and widely accepted in technical summaries that the wellbore or drilling operation breached or connected with the mine or a path into it. What is less safe is a simple courtroom sentence spoken without caveat. One party alone caused everything, and the map error is fully settled in every detail. The record is not that neat, and that lack of neatness is not a weakness in the episode. It is the point. Industrial disasters often become stories of one bad action because one bad action is easier to draw. A drill bit is visible, a whirlpool is visible, a rig falling into a lake is visible, a coordinate assumption is not, a stale map is not, a permit boundary is not, a meeting where two sets of drawings fail to become one shared reality is not. But that is where the disaster became possible. The lake did not need a monster. It needed a path. Once that path existed, salt and water did the rest. As fresh water entered the mine, it enlarged the route through dissolution and erosion. The water carried material into the voids. The roof and surrounding ground lost support. The surface collapse grew. Objects on the lake and shoreline were pulled toward the new low point. The Delcombre Canal, which normally moved water away from the lake toward Vermilion Bay, and the Gulf system reversed flow as the lake level dropped. For a time, the canal became an inlet. That reversal helped refill the lake, but not with the same water body that had existed before. Saltier water moved back into the basin. The old, shallow freshwater lake had been transformed into a deeper, brackish to saltwater lake with an altered ecology. The lake disappeared into the mine. Then the region around it began building a different lake over the wound. Some objects returned in a way that made the story even stranger. After the pressure equalized, some sunken barges later resurfaced. But the mine did not come back. The Jefferson Island Mine was effectively lost as a mine. Workers lost jobs. The landscape around the lake changed. Lawsuits and settlements followed. The low casualty count should not soften the seriousness of the event. It should sharpen the analysis. Because Lake Peigneur is a rare disaster where we can examine the system without first passing through mass death. It shows the structure of risk before grief overwhelms the record. The strongest ethical way to tell this story is not to pretend it was a near apocalypse for effect. It is to ask why the escape succeeded in one part of the system while prevention failed in another. Inside the mine, emergency procedure turned warning into action. Between the industries, coordination turned warning into paperwork. That difference is the episode. At the beginning, the map promises separation. The lake is here, the mine is below. The well is placed nearby. Each line means safety only if every other line is accurate, current, and shared. Then the map starts to fail. A stuck drill string appears at depth. Mud circulation disappears. A rig tilts. Water enters the mine. The surface collapses. The canal reverses. A garden and shoreline slump into the lake. By the end, the old map has to be redrawn because the landscape has changed to match the failure. That is why this episode should not be titled only around the whirlpool. The whirlpool was the visible consequence. The invisible premise was that dangerous systems can overlap safely if their paperwork overlaps perfectly. And paperwork is a fragile thing to trust with a salt dome. The official response after the event focused first on life safety. Residents were evacuated. MSHA restricted access. Monitoring equipment was installed to detect additional ground movement. Officials measured terrain shifts and watched for further subsidence. The immediate question was whether the disaster was still moving. In the first days, that was the right question. Later, the harder question remained: how had an oil drilling operation and an underground salt mine been allowed to work so close to the same hidden boundary? The official report had every reason to be cautious. It did not need a villain to show a failure. The failure was in the dependency. If the drill location was wrong, the system failed. If the mine maps were wrong, the system failed. If the two sets of information could not be reconciled with enough certainty to protect the mine, the system failed. Different route. same destination. That is the author position I want to hold to the end. The record is more honest when it refuses a simple blame sentence than when later retellings pretend the uncertainty is gone. But the same record is also damning in a quieter way. It shows that the only truly successful system that morning was the one designed for escape after prevention had already failed. A disaster becoming inevitable does not always feel dramatic while it is being assembled. It can look like separate industries doing ordinary work. A permit, a drill plan, a mine map, a daily report, a shift change, a shallow lake with a rig on it. Then one boundary is breached and everything that had been separate becomes one system. Lake, mine, canal, garden, gas well, shoreline. All of it starts answering to the same hole. There is no need to exaggerate Lake Peigneur. The verified facts are already severe enough. A shallow lake drained into a mine, a canal reversed, land disappeared, a mine was lost. Workers escaped because they acted quickly. The precise allocation of blame remained more complicated than the viral version usually admits. That is why the final image should not be only the whirlpool. It should be the map after the water return. Same place name, different lake. The Lake Peigneur disaster did not begin when the water started spinning. It began when the salt dome became a shared workspace without a shared enough truth. The record does not let us say that one drawing alone failed. It lets us say something more durable. When underground boundaries are life safety systems, uncertainty is not background noise. It is the hazard,